Hello, welcome to a beginner tutorial on krita. Today I will be going through the basic tools available when you start krita. Um, when you install krita, you're starting it up for the first time, you usually get this starting screen here. This is to create a new file. This is for the user manual and the website and the source code. As of now, I'm only going to work with the beginner things to just get you started and up and running, and from there it's up to you what you do next. This may be over a number of videos. If it goes beyond the video limit, I'll just break it up into a few videos. If not, it will all be under one window. Now, usually if you want to start, you can use a graphics tablet, you can use a mouse. krita is a free open source graphic design or drawing application. You can use it for various things. You can also use it for animations. I'm just going to start with a default custom document. You can use different templates, but for now, this is something you would learn as you go along. So for now, I'm going to create a custom document, and I will explain the tools as they come along. Right. Obviously, I'm going to change to the default setting. This is the default workspace. This is usually what you start with. When you start krita, you usually start with this default workspace. You can always change the workspace depending on what you do. Usually, if you want to just draw a picture, you use the default workspace. If you want to do an animation, you go to the animation workspace. The main difference between these two workspaces is there's the animation segment at this bottom corner. This is for people who are more advanced, so I will just try and be as quick as I can on the differences. Animations are made up of keyframes, and this is the timeline. You can change different timelines, and you can draw different drawings on each of the timeline to simulate movement. This is to create a new keyframe. This is to change the play speed and the frame rates. Standard animations are 24 frames per second. This is to look at what animation frame you are on and start and end times. For now, we're not really going to work into animation, so I will go back to the default because I want to just start on that. Please note I'm still a beginner on this, so I will try my best to explain what I can as best as I can. Now, to start with, this is the select tool. This mainly works with vectors. Vectors are usually shapes and things. Because I'm not working on a vector layer, it won't work. Now, if I was to create a new layer, then you can work with this as a vector. Then I can say, for example, if I draw a square on the vector layer, I should, in theory, be able to work with this as a vector. I can select it, I can rotate it, I can drag, I can drop, I can move this around, all depending on this, because I've created a vector layer. By default, you can create by default a paint layer. Paint layers are totally different, but for now, yeah, we will get into that eventually. This is to add text. It's very standard. Create a text box. You can write whatever you want here. Lorem ipsum, that's the standard text that's always written when you create something. Once you've done that, you save, and there it is. we have our text. The text that was written there is here on this. Again, if I want to edit it, I can always double click on the text, and whatever I write here ends, as soon as I save it, ends up being in the text box. Now, like with everything else, the text box is on a vector layer, so I can move the text box around and it moves the text around. But for now, let's not really worry too much about that. This is just explaining these tools. Now, on the vector layer, when I click on this box, there are different icons. This icon here means I can drag. When I click and drag, I make the box bigger and smaller. This is both in height and in height. I can make it taller, shorter. I can make it wider, and I can make it slimmer. I can make it bigger, that's tall and wide, or small and slim. Shorter and slimmer, smaller. I can turn a rectangle into a square. That's just following this angle. But every time I move this angle here, it only moves to this side. That means this angle is top left, so I can only increase it topwards or leftwards. Okay, likewise, if I move to this side, this box, I can make it taller and shorter, but I can only move it from the top. Here is the top right. I can only move it from the top or rightwards. Here I can only move it right from the right side. I can make it wider or shorter from the right side. Bottom right. It works with the same principle. Bottom and bottom left. That's mainly how sizing works with the select tool. Now, another thing with the select tool is to make this easier, I will just do a quick there. Now, with the select tool, I can also skew. You see it when the mouse cursor changes to a left arrow and a right arrow, that means I can skew it. Skewing means when I move this way, it makes the box slant according to the direction of the arrow. Likewise, if I was to skew it this way, I am also, nope, the wrong tool. If I was to skew it this way, I didn't do that. Sometimes this does happen. It's about getting it to the right spot, really. Again, you can always double click on the vector layer to skew, and again it moves the bottom in the same vein. Now, the only reason I can do this is because I am on a layer I created, and this layer is the vector layer. When I created a layer, to create a layer, in the layers toolbox here, this is the layers toolbox. in the plus, if you just press the plus, you create a blank layer. That's a paint layer. If you click on this down arrow, you can see what type of layer you want, and I created a vector layer. That's why I'm able to make vector shapes in a vector layer. Now here the icon has changed. This is the rotate tool. The reason it's rotating like this is because at the very center here, this is the rotating point. Because the rotating point is right and dead in the middle, it rotates according to that rotating point. So I can, from this, I can turn a square into a diamond. Again, it's art. It's all what you want to make from it. The next tool is this tool. This is the it's to edit lines. Like I don't know how to, I'm not explaining this properly, but how I've turned an edge. I can smooth the edge into making it a circle, provided I click on it. Like, you have to basically click on the item. It's a transform tool. It transforms a shape from one form to another, usually smoothing edges. So if you go from a circle to a square to whatever else you're trying to make. Likewise, it functions differently depending on the item you select. Like with a circle, instead of making it a full circle, you can turn it to a half circle. Again, it's all subjective. It all depends on what you want to do with the tool. And again, this works because we're working with layers. Right, I will go further down to the next tool. The next tool is, I will be honest, I'm not very sure about it. It's a brush tool. It's a standard brush tool. It does what it says, but this is more or less a calligraphy brush. I know I'm not doing a very good job in actually teaching you how things work, but it's a very basic calligraphy brush, a calligraphy pen. The pen is it's wider when you move it in this direction and thinner when you move it in the other direction. Depending on how you do the art, you can create different forms of art. This also works in the vector layer because it basically functions very well as a vector. Now, the best way to actually really learn krita is by doing. So basically fiddle around with the different tools and you will get a better feel for how it works. Another thing to note, when you usually start krita, this crosshairs, the crosshairs cursor doesn't always show. For that, you go into settings, configure krita, and in here, cursor, always pick a cursor because by default it's no cursor, but always make sure you have a cursor like crosshairs. That way it makes it easier for you to work with your artwork when you're drawing. Now we're done with the layers, with vector layers. So for now I can get rid of that. If you have a layer you don't like say for example layer 3, you don't like this layer, click on the dustbin, and it goes away. The next thing I would now work on is on layers. I won't go into layers because right now I'm working with tools. Okay, so I'm going to stick with tools for now. I will go further down the tutorial as I go along. Sorry if it's not very organized, but I'll try my best towards the organization. This is a brush tool. With Krita, you can use the brush tool like any brush, and it does exactly what it says on the tin. It's a brush. Now, when you work with brushes, one thing you need to also keep in mind is the brush presets. And when looking at each of these presets, you see different pens. Underneath the pens, you also see the lines. These lines show how the brush works. Because right now I'm working with this brush. That's what it is, because that's what the brush tool I picked works like. If I was to pick a different brush, like say this brush, the cursor changes. You do see the tiny little dots, but when I move, it also functions in a similar way to how this works. I've not really put pressure point selection on this, but again, I hope this does make sense as to how it is. I'm going to stick with the yellow pen because it just functions for me. I would just prefer to sit with that yellow pen for the purposes of this. When you select a tool, this top side, I would explain the properties bar up here. The properties bar has a number of things. This is gradient fill. You don't really need to worry about gradient fill for now. This is brushes. You can choose, you can fine tune a brush to more to your liking if you don't like the way the original brush is. If you're done with fine tuning a brush, just basically click in the gray area outside your drawing and it goes away. For now, this is the eraser tool. It basically does what it says on the tin. It's a cleaner. It erases certain things. And moving further on, opacity. To explain opacity, I know this is very basic information, but I will try my best to explain that. Okay. Opacity basically means how non-transparent an object is. This is 100% opacity, shows that thickness. If I reduce it to 48%, the line is lighter. And again, you can use it for various different things depending on what your art needs. Krita is just a tool, and like any other tool, it's up to you to use it the way you see fit. Brush size increases or reduces the size of the brush. By default, I always leave it at 100%, but brush size usually says how thick the line you are drawing will be. Now, this is odd. This is, oh yeah, because I selected eraser. That's why. Always look at what you're doing in Krita. The computer always tells you what you're doing, but again, it helps if you look at what you are doing. It makes more sense once you do. Now, brush size on 5 pixels. Every time I draw a line, it's 5 pixels thick. If I was to increase this to 53 pixels, the dot grows. It's thicker. It's now a thicker line. Again, this is something that you learn as you go along. It's further down as you further down the lines, you get a better understanding of how it functions. And I'll just leave this on 5 pixels wide because I just prefer to have it 5 pixels. Right. Anything else I need to explain on lines? Not really. There is a few things more. On every layer, there's an eyeball here. This eyeball means if you want to show a layer or if you want to hide the layer. Once you've hidden a layer, it becomes not seen. That's if basically, if like practical uses will be a situation of where, say for example, I make a new layer and I sketch a circle and a line and an arrow. These are my rough sketches. Now if I want to now draw, I now make a new layer. I can now make my drawing based on this outline. It's not a very good drawing, but again, once you're done with that, you can then see how your drawing is based on what the circle, what's not the circle, on what the layers are. Layers are basically like drawings on top of drawings on top of drawings. Now, the layer ordering is very important because this layer, layer 5, is always going to be on top of layer 4, which is on top of layer 3, which is on top of layer 2. If I want layer 5 to be underneath layer 4, I click on the square and I drag it down, and it goes underneath the order of layer 4. Again, if layer 4 is kind of like a sketchy layer, I can change the opacity. I can make it lighter so it's there as a guideline. So when I'm working on layer 5, it doesn't cause much confusion. It doesn't cause much confusion, and I can leave it there as a guideline to actually help. Now, layer 4 and layer 5, I'm not going to use any further. I'll just create a new layer, a new paint layer to explain the next. This line tool, very self-explanatory. You draw a straight line, it gives you a straight line. End of. Yeah, so basically remove this. This isn't standard removal process. Every time I draw a line and I'm getting rid of that line, I'm basically undoing. And anyone who knows that, it's a staple of it. Undo, this is the undo function. You can click on that to undo your last action. You can click on this to redo the last action. You can also find the undo and redo functions under edit. Now, okay, moving onwards, we have the square tool. It does what it says on the tin. It draws a square. You have a circle tool. It draws a circle. Likewise, this square is different from the earlier square. An easier way to explain it is we are on a paint layer. Now, I can't edit or skew this square because we are not on a vector layer. Krita is telling me this. If I wanted to create a square that I wanted to edit, I would have to create that square on a new layer as a vector layer, which will be there. And say for example I now draw the square here, I can now edit this square. I can move it around. This is not possible on the other square because that square, going back to layer 6, because this square, wrong thing, because that square was drawn on a different layer. I can't edit this square no matter what I do. The reason why is because this square was drawn as a paintbrush. This square was drawn as a vector, as a square, so I can edit this square. I can change different things on it. If I double click the square, then it becomes the skew, the transform function. If I double click again, it becomes the move and resize. They function similarly. Now, to move on from that, this is the polygon tool. You click and you tell it how many sides to a polygon you want to create and where you want it to be. When you're done, you just click where you started and it will create your polygon. There are uses for this, like say for example I'm drawing this, and that. There are times when you would want to use such a tool like this. It all depends on what you are creating with your artwork. Again, krita is just a tool. It's just an art tool. Now, the difference between this polygon tool and this tool here, they function similarly. You create this, and this. Now, the difference is the polygon tool has to end as a closed shape. This tool doesn't. For simplicity's sake, I will and once you double click, you end your polygon editing at the double click. This is different from this tool because if I was to do exactly the same thing, 1, 2, it closes that automatically to the first and the last. That's the main difference between these two, the two polygonal tools. One's a polygon tool, one is just a normal shape tool. They have different functions and different uses, and you will learn them as you go along with krita. This is a line tool. It's sort of like the polygon, not the polygon, the point-to-point tool, but it functions differently. Like I can create that to that. However, this has an added function where I can click a point and drag to make a curve. Again, there are times when you would need to create a curved end as opposed to a pointy end. They have different functions. Now, this tool functions exactly the same. The only difference between this okay, that's a totally different tool. It wasn't the tool I thought it to be. Apologies, I will be honest, I don't quite clearly get what that tool is. This is a freehand pen tool. It's like the brush. Again, I did say from the very beginning, I'm not very good at this, but this is at a beginner's side to actually try and help people understand the tool. And this tool, it functions with the select tool. Now, before I go into this tool, I will have to go to the select tool. So I will jump to the select tool. Select tool, this just functions as I draw a square And when I draw the square, the dotted line shows what I'm selecting. When you do that, any actions you take function within the selection. For simplicity's sake, let's just say I've drawn a selection of these. The moving dotted line covers this region. Now I will pick a brush tool and I will pick this wide angled brush. If I try writing outside the selection, it will not function. However, if I try writing in the selection, it functions. There are times when you will want to limit what you're doing to a specific area. This is where the selection tool functions. And again, it does help with more flexibility on these aspects of things. Likewise, you can always just pick a selection and you could just fill it a simple color, but we will come to coloring and filling in a moment. Now, with the selection tool, the same way this tool functioned, you can use this on layers that are not vector layers. In essence, you can basically turn a non-vector shape into functioning as a vector. And to actually help with this, I will get a volunteer, which will be our triangle. Now, I can, once you've created the selection, this is the square select tool. You click and you drag. Always move from one corner to the opposite corner when you work with the square selection. And once you've selected it, this first point is the free form. This is how you move. It functions in the same way as the very first select tool. Again, remember the increase in size, decrease in size, make it taller, make it shorter, make it wider, make it thinner, move it at an angle. It functions in the same line. And now you also have the skew features as well. The skew features, this is where you skew things with the arrows pointing in opposite directions, parallel to each other, kind of like these arrows here. Now, when you use the skew, it very much functions in this way. Now, every time you skew, it functions exactly like how I expected the original arrows to function, but didn't. When you skew, if you move it left, if you move the top left, the bottom goes right. If you move, and likewise, it functions the same way with the side skews as well. To get to the skews, you have to select the line itself, and it functions in that vein. As it functions in that vein. When you move one thing in one direction, the other thing moves in the other direction. This crosshair dot here is where you select how it rotates. By default, it's always in the middle. So whenever you rotate the circular rotation, it always rotates on that axis according to with having that circle in the middle. If I was to move that slightly to a point here, the rotation would follow. Likewise, if I was to move this point to, say, this angle, the angular rotation also changes. It's basically that selects the center of the rotation point. Right. I believe I've explained everything I can on that. This again just moves your selection accordingly. And this is the crop tool. If you want to crop out things, segments of your selection, you can. But I haven't really found out how this functions. I need to basically play around with it to actually understand it properly. Right. Now time to go into the fills. This is the gradient fill. The way gradient fills work is you click from one end and you drag it to the other. This creates a gradient. How do I explain this differently? A gradient, because I started my gradient fill from this section and I dragged to this section, the gradient picks one color and moves it all the way to the other. And this is where this gradient comes into line. The default gradient is one color to a transparent color. The reason why why it's white is because it's not white, it's because there is no background, and the background is just a plain white picture. So the gradient functions in that way. You can always change the color of the gradient fill from one thing to, say, I don't know, I'm going to pick that and have that go the other way. Again, it's all subjective to what you want to take out of it. Coloring. Right. This is your color wheel. If you want a particular color, you can always select it through the primary color wheel here, and from here you can get different shades of whatever color it is you are trying to get out. This is the color selector. And every time you select a color, Krita remembers your previous colors. It remembers every single color you've selected. So this is a previous color I've used and it remembers it, so I can always come back to it. This is the color history, the historic trail of colors you've used from start to finish. Right, seeing how long this video has been. It's been 38 minutes. I still carry on. Right. Right. For the next part, I will select black is my color. Now, the next tool that I will choose is this tool. It's called. It looks like a It's called the paint bucket tool. It's okay. First things first, I can't work with the paint bucket tool because I'm in a selection. I know this is not a very organized tutorial, but yeah. Selection. Now to change my selection, I just need to stop selecting what I've selected. I need to click on the select tool and just click anywhere else. And I stop selecting a particular thing. Else, I would only be selecting that particular thing. The selector tools, there are different types of selector tools. There is the square selector. That means you select a square shape. is the circular selector. That means you select a circular shape. There's the polygonal selector. That means you click the area you want to specifically select, and you double click to end, and the selection has followed through. And we have the freeform. This just means you want to select a particular region. Again, there are times when you would want to use one over the other. It's a case of you just right over to cut this segment out that you want to work with. And it also requires you to have a very stable hand while working on it. You could always just do that, and it basically finds the most logical selection area of what it is you're trying to do. Again, with all selections, if you've selected an area and you're done with that selection, just click outside. The next tool is the wand tool, selection wand. You just click an area and it automatically selects everything in that area. Not necessarily everything, but I'll try and explain this better. It's kind of like an auto selector. Say, for example, I wanted to select the square. With this, I've selected the square tool. Because I used the wand, right? For simplicity's sake, I'll just try explaining this better. The magic wand basically selects as best of an area that it can select based on what you want, what the computer thinks you want it to select. Now, because I click inside this closed circle, I have selected that closed circle. And so, anything I do affects only that closed circle. Now, if I was to use the wand differently and I was to click the line, that didn't click the line, that didn't click the line, that didn't click the line, that clicked the line. If I was to select the line, anything I do affects that line and only that line. A good example would be, now that I've selected the line, that's what happens. It's only the line that was affected because it's only the line I clicked. Likewise, if you have varying things, but like the way the selector tool works is it only picks one thing in a certain area, and you would know this when you see the dotted moving line showing you what it is that you have selected. And these other tools, I'm not too particularly sure about these three tools, so I will not try and confuse you any further with that. Now, this here is the eyedropper tool. Say, for example, I've picked black, right? That is my color that I've selected. However, I want to select a different color that's not black, because black is the color that I want. The eyedropper tool helps you select the specific color based on what you click on. It tells you, it basically creates the color mixture depending on what you click. Now, because I've clicked here, if I was to fill this, it fills it based on this color because this is the color that I picked. There are varying uses for this, but the eyedropper is very useful. Say, for example, when you want to change and work with different colors of varying degrees, and you don't know how to faff about with this, but you know you've used a color before, or there's a color that you imported from a picture that you've not used before, and you want to use that specific color. That's how you work with the eyedropper tool to actually get those colors. This paint bucket is a fill tool. It means it fills. It basically fills an enclosed area with one color. Because I picked that particular color, because this area is enclosed, all of this area is going to be filled up with that color. Now, if I was to try pouring it onto this, because this area is not enclosed, it fills it in everywhere. It fills everywhere the same color, but it would ignore closed areas. This area is closed, so it won't fill it. This area is closed, so well, it won't fill it because it's closed. Reason why it looks like it's filled it is because this color and this color are the same. Likewise, this area is enclosed, so it doesn't get filled. Trying to think, what else do I need to explain on this? This is the zoom tool. Now, with the zoom tool, I will use this to explain layers. Nope, wrong layer. I will create a vector layer and I will create a circle next to this. Nope. Now create a circle next to this circle. When you have the zoom tool selected, you just click an area and it zooms in. If you want to zoom into a level and cover a specific area, you click and drag, and it drag over what it is you want the zoom to cover, and it zooms in to that layer. Now, the main reason I am zooming in closer is the paint layer is made up of dots per inch, and each of these, in as much as I created a circle, it's a circle, but when you zoom in closer on a circle, it becomes less rounded and more jagged, and this is generally how the program works on things. And this is something you have to be aware of when you're doing your drawings, especially if you want an area to be enclosed. You need to be very mindful of the fact that when it's enclosed, it's actually enclosed. Because say, for example, I'm working on layer 6 now and I did a circle, but I didn't fully close it. In the computers, in krita's processing, this is a closed area, so if I was to fill this with a color, no, that's not supposed to happen. Either way. Oh yeah, because I'm working on different layers, that's why. Duh. Okay. Just to rectify that, I'll just try to simplify this with a different way here. Okay, fine. Okay. Now, if I was to fill this, it fills because it fills with that color. However, if I was to try and say fill this, it wouldn't fill, because as far as krita is concerned, this this isn't a closed circle, and if I was zoomed out, now time to explain the zoom tool. When you hold control and you click, you are zooming out. If you normally click, you're zooming in, but if you hold control and you click, you are zooming out. For some reason, this wasn't seen as a closed circle, but that's just krita for you. Anyhow, because now I'm zooming out, it depends on how I did the circle. I did that line. If I didn't draw the line properly, then it would not show properly, as the computer still wouldn't see that as a closed space. I know I'm not really explaining this, and I do apologize. This is the hand tool. This hand tool is to pan, to move around on the picture, especially when you're zoomed in a bit closer to the picture. Especially when you're zoomed in a bit closer to the picture. So, say for example, I'm drawing like that and I need to move a bit lower. I just move this lower, then I can carry on and resume my drawing of the fish. Well, it's not a very good fish, but again, you do get the point of what I'm trying to make on this. Now, with these tools that I've done, you're still capable of actually doing something decent with krita. As long as you understand how layers work and how the pen works, you can really end up creating something really nice with it, with krita. Again, krita is also very good because again, you can always make, most artists, they always draw from reference, so you can always have the reference somewhere and you can always use that with you. Like, say for example, I'm drawing something and it's based on this reference. I just draw the reference over there, and I have my reference picture over there. Then I would be able to actually know what it is that I am trying to do. Again, this is not a very good drawing, but it kind of like works to make your sketch. Then from your sketch you can then probably make it less detailed, create a new layer, and then from there you zoom in a bit more closer to know what it is you're trying to make, and then from there you know how to make your drawing a bit more elegant, if that makes sense. And sorry about the silence. This is just an example. This is not really a very good drawing by any standards, but it's just there to try and prove a tiny point that, pending on the tools you've got, it's not necessarily, it's pending on the tools you've got that you use to actually create what you want. And this is a very, very badly drawn sketch, but just based on that sketch alone, in the hands of an actual very good artist, you could actually create something decent. This is not a very good drawing by any stretch of an imagination, but this was done in like what, 5-10 seconds. But again, all I used was just the paint, at the freehand animation on the freehand brush tool. again, working with just the freehand brush tool, you could still take things further and say fill him with that color, give him, I don't know, blue hair. Then, right, what color do I make his coat? Green. Well, no, I'll make his coat green, and I'll make his tie black. See? And again, with more practice and more work, you could actually end up creating something reasonable. This is a very sloppy drawing because there's no perspective, no shading, no foreshortening, no anything of any nature that was actually done properly. But to a degree, it actually functions to its own right. Now, when it comes to fill, there is a setting on that needs to be done to actually help. But again, this is all just a beginner's starting point on krita to actually know the tools and how it functions. Over time, you will know the tools, and over time, you will know how each tool functions. Again, just remember this is the freehand brush. You use it to write this, and it's all depending on what brush or pen or pencil you use over there. This is the line tool. You use it to make straight lines. You use this to make squares. You use this to make circles. You use this to make polygons and double click to end. You use this to make points to points shapes or lines and double click again to end. You use this to make bend points to points but curves. And that I'm not so sure of. This is also a brush tool. It functions like the first brush tool, but they are different in different ways. This is the select tool, which is linked to this select tool. If you have nothing selected, it automatically just selects every single drawing on the page. You can resize it, you can move it, you can rotate it, you can skew them. This is the gradient fill. You get to fill things from one color to another. This is the color picker tool. Use it to pick a color, and this is the fill tool, which you use to fill a color. This is the area select tool. This helps you select an area in a circle shape, select an area in a square shape, select an area in a polygonal shape. Say you want to select a particular region and leave all other regions out. This is also to kind of like carve out areas that you want. And this is the magic wand. It's kind of like an auto select for an area. So say for example you wanted to select a particular area and leave something out. Now that you've done that, say I pick this, I don't know, something stupid like this, and I go like this. It doesn't affect what is not selected. It only affects the selection area. And likewise, when you've selected an area and you want to unselect an area, just click the select tool and click. Don't drag, click. This is the zoom tool. You use it to zoom in on an area. You can drag to select the area you want to zoom in, or just click to zoom in on that specific area.